My son shoved me toward the stairs. For a split second, I felt the weight of my body tip forward, air rushing out of my chest. My right hand clawed desperately at the wall, then found the rail. Cold metal under my palm, hard, unyielding. I gripped it with everything I had left in me. Adam didn't. His own momentum carried him forward. I watched him stumble, his hand sliding off my sleeve, his eyes wide with shock. Then the sound, the heavy, terrible thud of a grown man's body hitting wooden steps, once, twice, again. By the time he stopped moving, sprawled at the landing below, I was trembling, but I was still standing. I didn't scream. That's the strange thing. No shriek, no wail, just the dry rasp of my own breath. I'd been shoved before, not always with hands, but with words, with demands, with guilt. This was simply the first time his strength had been more physical than verbal. I leaned against the rail, my knuckles white, and whispered his name. Adam. He groaned, his arm bent at an ugly angle, his legs twisted awkwardly. Alive, but hurt. Not dead. Not like I thought in that split second when everything was silent but the blood pounding in my ears. I called 911 with steady fingers. The operator asked if he was breathing. I said yes. She asked if he was conscious. Barely, I said. She told me to stay calm until help arrived, as if calm were something you could choose, like changing a dress. But I was calm. Calmer than I'd been in years. The flashing lights painted my walls red and blue. 2 paramedics lifted Adam onto a stretcher, securing his head, his arm. One of them asked me how it happened. He lost his balance, I said, and my voice didn't even shake. Not yet. I looked at the rail, my savior, my proof. Without it, I'd have been the one carried out. A police officer stayed behind. His badge read, Grant. He was young, but not green. He looked at me the way my late husband used to when something didn't add up at the dinner table. Mrs. Keene, did he push you? His voice was even, not accusing. My lips parted, then closed again. The truth pressed at my throat. He laid hands on me, I answered finally. I grabbed the rail. He didn't. Grant scribbled in his notebook, nodded, said he'd be in touch. Elder abuse, he called it quietly, almost to himself. Words I'd only read about in pamphlets at the doctor's office. By midnight, the house was still again. The rail was still warm from my grip. I sat on the second step, staring at the dark streak Adam's shoe had left on the wood. The silence was heavy but clean, like after a storm. I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. For once, it belonged to me. At dawn, the house smelled of antiseptic and old wood. I hadn't slept. The rail had kept me upright, but the memory of Adam's eyes, wide, almost startled that I resisted, kept me awake. I poured tea into my chipped mug, the one with faded violets, and sat by the window. Across the street, Mrs. Chen watered her begonias. She was younger than me by maybe 10 years, but life had carved her face just as deep. I wondered what she would say if she'd seen what happened. She had, in a way. When the ambulance pulled away, she stood on her porch in her housecoat, arms folded, lips pressed tight. A silent witness. The knock came at 8. Officer Grant again, still in uniform, not looking tired at all. Mrs. Keene, may I come in? His politeness almost broke me. I let him sit at the kitchen table. He flipped open his notebook. I'll need your statement for the report. You don't have to decide right now whether you want charges pressed, but it's important we document. He asked me to describe what happened. I spoke slowly, tasting each word, making sure it was true. He was angry. He wanted me to sign papers, financial papers, I refused. He grabbed my arm, shoved me toward the stairs. I held the rail. He fell. Writing scratched across his page. Has he done this before? My throat tightened. He's never shoved me like that. But the pressure, yes, always pressure. To hand things over, to make things easier for my own good. I smiled without humor. It was never for my good. Grant looked at me for a long time, not with pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. Mrs. Keene, you're entitled to protection. Elder abuse isn't just bruises. It's financial exploitation, intimidation. You qualify for an emergency protective order. It would keep him from contacting you until the court can review. My hands rested on the mug, cooling tea untouched. Is it noisy? Going to court? He almost smiled. It's paperwork mostly, but it sets boundaries. Boundaries, a word my life had known too little of. The phone rang while he was there. I let it ring. He glanced at the caller ID, Adam. I shook my head. He didn't insist I answer. Instead, he left a pamphlet, resources, phone numbers, a hotline. Just in case, he said. As he left, he paused by the rail, running his hand along it. Good rail, he muttered. Saved you. I nodded. My anchor. My proof. By mid-morning, Lena arrived. My daughter-in-law, all perfume and brittle smiles. She tapped on the new lock with her manicured nails until I opened. Martha, she began in that tone she always used when selling houses, sweet but sharp underneath. What happened last night? Adam says you're confused. He tripped, that's all. You don't want people to think you accused your own son of... I stopped her. My voice surprised me. I'll sign nothing but the truth, Lena. Her mouth tightened, as if I'd spoken obscenity. She thrust a casserole dish into my hands. You must be tired. I didn't invite her in. I set the dish on the hall table and closed the door gently, but firmly. For the first time, she didn't get past the threshold. Evening fell quietly. I sat on the second step again, the rail cool under my palm. I thought of James, my husband, gone these 12 years. He used to say, "Don't let yourself be handled, Martha," even by family. I had let myself be handled, pushed, steered like a cart in a grocery store. Last night, for the first time, I had held on, to the rail, to myself. When the phone rang again, I answered. It was the hospital. Adam's injuries were not life-threatening. Broken arm, cracked rib, a concussion. He was asking if I'd come. I said no. I wished him recovery, then placed the receiver down softly. My son would heal, but so would I, in different ways. Morning light caught the edges of the photo frames on my mantel, turning faces of the past into faint gold. James in his suit on our 40th anniversary, my children when they were small, Adam holding a kite he never quite managed to fly. I stood in front of them with my phone in hand, listening to the bank's automated line. To speak with a representative, press 0. My finger pressed hard enough to make the phone creak. Community First Bank, this is Selena Ortiz. A woman's calm voice answered. Good morning, I said. My name is Martha Keene. I'd like to place an immediate suspension on all automatic payments and transfers from my accounts. There was silence, then the faint clicking of a keyboard. All of them, Mrs. Keene? You currently have 23 active authorizations. Yes, all of them. Her voice softened. Is everything all right? No, I answered simply, but I intend to make it so. She explained the process. A temporary block now, paperwork in person tomorrow. I agreed. As she read out confirmation numbers, I wrote them down on the back of an old grocery list. When she asked if there was anything else, I added, "Yes, I want to revoke the power of attorney granted to my son, Adam Keene." Another pause. "We can prepare the revocation form for your signature, Mrs. Keene. It will take effect the moment you sign." When I ended the call, the house seemed to exhale. I walked straight to the drawer of my secretary desk, pulled out the thick folder marked Adam. Receipts, loan slips, notes scribbled in his hand. Every request over the years dressed as necessity. Money for a down payment. Money for Ivy's orthodontics. Money for the roof that never got repaired. Each time I had told myself it was temporary, that it was love. Now the folder looked like evidence. At noon, I called Mr. Patel, the attorney James and I had used when we bought this house 40 years ago. His voice was the same as ever, brisk but not unkind. "Mrs. Keene, what can I do for you?" "I need to rescind a power of attorney, and I'd like to discuss protections for my property. Trusts, wills, whatever keeps my affairs in my hands." "Understood," he said. "Come in tomorrow. Bring identification. We'll take it step by step." That phrase, step by step, made me smile grimly. Steps had nearly cost me my life yesterday. Now they would help me reclaim it. By afternoon, I replaced the front door lock. The locksmith, a cheerful man with tattoos of roses on his forearm, didn't ask why. "New key, new start," he said, handing me the set. I locked the door twice after he left, just to feel the weight of the click. The phone buzzed with messages. Adam, of course. Some apologetic, some angry, some pleading. Lena, too. "You're being unfair. Think of the family." I placed the phone face down. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. At 4 o'clock, I made myself tea and carried the cup to the stairs. I ran my hand once more along the rail, feeling each groove in the wood. It had saved me from a fall. Now it felt like more than that. It felt like a line drawn. On one side was the woman who bent, who yielded, who signed away her strength. On the other was the woman who said no. That night, I slept. Not well, not fully, but without the twitching dread that had lived in my chest for years. The kind of sleep that comes after hard decisions, where the mind says, "You did what had to be done." Lena showed up the next morning with her usual perfume cloud and a paper bag from the bakery, as though bread rolls could erase the weight of last night. She knocked, then rattled the handle, forgetting, or refusing to believe, that I had changed the lock. I opened the door only as far as the chain would allow. "Martha," she said, her smile tight, "I thought I'd come help you. You must be exhausted after all that excitement." "Excitement," I repeated, my voice flat. Her eyes flickered toward the chain. "Why is the lock different?" "Because I wanted it different." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "You don't need to shut us out. Adam is terribly upset. He says you've misunderstood." "No," I interrupted. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. "What I understand is that he put his hands on me. I grabbed the rail. He didn't. That's the truth." Her smile vanished. "Do you really want to put that on record? Think of what people will say. Do you want the whole family dragged through court?" I unlatched the chain just long enough to take the paper bag, then closed the door again. "I'll sign nothing but the truth, Lena." I heard her sharp exhale before her heels clicked back down the walkway. The rolls were still warm, but I left them untouched on the counter. Bread can't mend what has been broken for years. By afternoon, Officer Grant called to say he had filed an emergency protective order, valid for 72 hours. "He cannot contact you directly, Mrs. Keene. If he does, call us. We'll handle it." 3 days, I murmured. "It's a start," he replied. That evening, the phone buzzed again, messages piling like dead leaves. "Adam, Mom, please answer." Then, "You're making this worse." Then, "I need you to say it was an accident." The words shifted from pleading to commanding, the same old dance. I didn't answer. Instead, I wrote each one down in a notebook with a steady hand. Evidence, not conversation. The quiet of the house wrapped around me. It was the first night in years when I didn't wait for the phone to ring with demands. I made a pot of chicken soup, not because anyone was coming over, but simply because I wanted it. I ate slowly, spoon scraping the bowl, the rhythm calm, unhurried. At 9, I walked through the rooms, checking locks, touching walls. The house had never felt more like mine. I stopped by the stairs. My palm found the rail again, cool and solid. I whispered into the silence, "Thank you." Not to the rail alone, but to myself, for holding on. When I lay down, I realized something. The fear wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It was no longer the fear of what Adam might do. It was the fear of facing myself, of finally saying no after decades of yes. I turned onto my side, pulled the quilt to my chin, and let the new kind of silence settle in. That night, I dreamed not of falling, but of standing. Hospitals have a smell that never leaves your memory: bleach and plastic, mixed with something human you can't quite name. I knew it before I walked in, but the moment it reached me, I was carried back to James's last days. The thought nearly turned me around at the sliding doors. Still, I went in. A nurse led me down a corridor lined with pale green walls. Adam lay in a narrow bed, his arm in a cast, his ribs bound. A bruise stretched like spilled ink across his cheek. He looked less like a man of 48 and more like the boy I'd once pulled out of a tree after he climbed too high. For a fleeting second, I felt the old instinct to rush to his side. But instincts can betray you. He opened his eyes, saw me, and frowned. "Mom, you came." "I came to hear what you'd say," I answered. His voice was hoarse. "It was stupid. I slipped. You know that. You don't want to ruin my life over an accident." I stood at the foot of his bed, hands resting on the rail. Always the rail between us. "You put your hands on me, Adam. You shoved me. That wasn't an accident." His jaw tightened. "Lena's right. You're confused. We should handle this privately. Don't make it a police matter. Families don't do that to each other." "Families," I repeated, my mouth dry. "Families don't corner their mothers with papers and threats. Families don't shove." He shifted, wincing. "If you keep this up, we'll lose the house. Ivy's tuition, the loans. I can't do it without you." I felt a pang at my granddaughter's name, but I steadied myself. "Then you'll learn to. You and Lena both. I won't lie for you, Adam. Heal your ribs. I'll heal my dignity." For a moment, he looked at me with something close to fear. Then he turned his face to the wall. I left without touching him. On my way out, a police officer I didn't know stopped me near the elevator. He'd taken Adam's preliminary statement. "Mrs. Keene, if you'd like to add yours, the detective can come to your house tomorrow." "I've already spoken with Officer Grant," I said, "and I'll speak again. I want it on record." The officer nodded, not surprised. Perhaps he'd seen too many mothers covering for their sons. Outside, the air was sharp with winter. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly across the parking lot. The hospital lights glowed behind me, sterile and bright. Ahead, the dark trees of the avenue felt truer, kinder. At home, I brewed tea and sat by the stairs again. That rail seemed to wait for me now, as if it knew I'd keep returning until I could finally let go of its memory. I placed my palm on it. Strong, unyielding. It had saved me once. It would remind me always. The neighbor boy, Eric, came by in the afternoon with a screwdriver set tucked under his arm. He's retired now, but years ago he taught electronics at the community college. When I explained I needed help retrieving footage from the small Wi-Fi camera in my hallway, the one Ivy had insisted I get after I tripped last winter, he nodded as if I'd asked him to water the garden. Of course, Mrs. Keene. These little things keep more than people realize. He connected wires, tapped at his laptop, muttered under his breath. Within minutes, the frozen images flickered to life on his screen. My hallway, my stairs, the shadow of Adam's figure as he turned toward me. My chest tightened. I saw myself clutching the folder of documents he'd pushed under my nose, refusing. His hand reaching, fingers hard on my shoulder, the shove, my stumble, my grip on the rail, his fall. Eric whistled softly. No doubt what happened here. He copied the file onto a flash drive and handed it to me like it was something fragile. Keep this safe. Better yet, make another copy. I slid it into the small, fireproof box where James's will still rested. The sight of those two things together, a testament to my husband's steady life and a testament to my son's reckless anger, nearly broke me. But I didn't cry. I only locked the box and set the key on my nightstand. That evening, Officer Grant came by. His uniform looked heavier than usual, perhaps from the weight of all the stories he carried in a single day. I showed him the footage without commentary. He watched in silence, jaw tightening. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. This is clear evidence, Mrs. Keene. It will support the protective order, and if charges are filed, it could be central. I nodded, my hand resting on the table. I don't want revenge. I just want space. Safety. You'll have it, he said firmly. He asked for a copy. I gave him one. Before leaving, he said, "It's rare to have proof this strong. You're brave to show it." Brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. But perhaps bravery was nothing more than refusing to pretend anymore. Later, the phone rang again. This time it was Ivy. Her voice trembled but held steady. "Grandma, Dad's angry. He says you're making up stories. But I know you wouldn't lie." Her breath hitched. "I don't know what to do." My heart softened at her honesty. "You don't have to do anything, sweetheart. This isn't your burden. Just remember you have choices. Always choices." We stayed on the line a while, not speaking much, just breathing. For the first time since the fall, I felt less alone. When I hung up, the house was quiet. I poured myself tea and stood at the foot of the stairs, the rail gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Proof, boundary, salvation. I traced its length with my fingertips. "Step by step," I whispered, echoing Mr. Patel's words. Each step now was mine to take. Not Adam's, not Lena's, mine. Mr. Patel's office smelled faintly of leather and paper, the kind of place where decisions lingered long after signatures dried. He stood as I entered, his dark suit as crisp as the day James and I first sat across from him 40 years ago to buy our house. Back then, I was 37, nervous, clutching James's hand under the table. Now I was 77, clutching no hand but my own resolve. "We'll start simple," Mr. Patel said, sliding a folder toward me. "First, the revocation of your son's power of attorney. Once you sign, he has no legal authority over your finances or property. The pen felt heavy. I signed anyway. The scratch of ink was louder than it should have been, like a door slamming shut. Next, he continued, we'll draft a new will. You mentioned a granddaughter, Ivy? I nodded. She's the only one who still calls me without wanting something, but I don't want to burden her with responsibility too soon. Then we establish a revocable living trust, he explained. Your house, your savings, any major assets. You place them in the trust. You remain the trustee while alive. Upon your passing, Ivy becomes the beneficiary. This keeps everything secure, avoids probate, and shields you from interference. I thought of Adam's voice in the hospital. We'll lose the house. Ivy's tuition, the loans. His words weren't about me. They never were. But this was about me, about protecting what I had built. What about Lena? I asked. Could she challenge it? Mr. Patel adjusted his glasses. She can try, but with clear documentation and your mental competence confirmed, it will hold. Courts respect clarity. Clarity. That was what I craved most. For decades, I had lived in a fog of compromises. Now I wanted lines sharp enough to cut. We spent 2 hours reviewing deeds, account numbers, life insurance details. I handed him the folder I'd carried for years, thick with receipts and proof of every time Adam had leaned on me. He flipped through, shaking his head. You've been far more generous than most parents, Mrs. Keene. Too generous. I thought generosity would bring closeness, I said quietly, but it only bought distance. He closed the folder gently. It's not too late to choose differently. When I left, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. In my purse rested a stack of unsigned drafts, waiting for my final review. I felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because I'd finally set it down where it belonged. At home, I brewed chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before me. My hand brushed across the trust document, the words revocable and living catching my eye. Living. That was the point, wasn't it? To live, not just to survive under the grip of someone else's needs. The phone buzzed, a message from Adam. Mom, please stop. We can fix this if you just sign the papers. Don't drag outsiders into it. I placed the phone face down without answering. Outsiders. As though lawyers and officers were strangers meddling, not protectors ensuring I wasn't erased. In the evening, I walked to the stairs, placed my hand on the rail. It no longer felt only like rescue. It felt like a line I had drawn. On one side, silence and submission. On the other, a voice. Mine. And for the first time in years, I intended to keep speaking. The handyman arrived with a toolbox that clattered like bones. His name was Clarence, a wiry man in his 60s with hands so steady they could thread a needle. He touched the rail that had saved me, pressed against the wall, and shook his head. Loose bolts, he muttered. Could have given way if you hadn't gripped it just right. Lucky woman. Not luck, I said quietly. Stubbornness. He chuckled without asking for explanation and set to work. By the time he was done, the rail gleamed under a fresh coat of polish, bolts tightened, stronger than it had been in decades. I ran my hand along it. Solid. Dependable. A partner, in a way, when flesh and blood had failed me. I asked Clarence to install brighter lights above the stairs, too. Falls happen fast, he said, nodding approvingly. Light helps. His words sounded practical, but they carried a weight he didn't know. For me, The light wasn't just for my feet, it was for my life. After he left, I brewed tea and carried it to the table where a stack of papers still waited. The trust drafts, the revocation forms, the protective order. I wasn't finished, but each page I touched made me feel steadier, like laying bricks in a wall that finally had my name on it. In the evening, Mrs. Chen knocked with a pot of soup. "I heard shouting the other night," she said gently. "And then the ambulance. Are you all right?" I considered brushing it off, but something inside me refused. "No," I said simply. "But I will be." She placed the soup on the counter and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you look, Martha. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her kindness was so quiet, it nearly undid me. I thanked her and ladled out a bowl. The soup tasted of ginger and care, two things I had not tasted in years. Later, I pulled out an old notebook and began listing everything Adam and Lena had tied me to. Automatic transfers, shared credit accounts, house repairs that were never finished. I crossed them out one by one, a small act of reclaiming space. Every slash of the pen was like a breath. When I finished, I closed the notebook and walked through the house. Each room felt different now, not because the walls had changed, but because I was finally seeing them without the fog of obligation. The quilt on my bed was mine. The dishes in the cabinet were mine. The silence was mine. I stopped at the stairs, the rail gleaming faintly under the new light. I placed my palm on it, feeling its steady strength. Once it had kept me from falling. Now it kept me from forgetting. I whispered into the quiet, "This house is mine. My life is mine." And for the first time in decades, the words didn't feel borrowed. They felt true. The courthouse smelled faintly of dust and old paper, the way only government buildings do. I wore my gray wool coat, the one James always said made me look formidable. That word had sounded like a joke then. Now it felt like armor. The protective order hearing was scheduled for 9. I sat in the front row of the small courtroom, my hands folded in my lap. The wooden benches were hard, but they grounded me. Across the aisle, Adam sat with his arm in a sling, Lena beside him. Her eyes darted to me, then away, as though looking too long might burn. The judge entered, an older woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She called the case, Keene v. Keene. How strange to see my own name doubled like a mirror cracked down the middle. The clerk asked if I wished to testify. I stood, my legs trembling, but my voice steady. I described what had happened, the papers, the argument, the shove, the rail, the fall. I told it plainly, without embellishment, as though I were describing the weather. Adam's lawyer tried to twist the story into clumsiness. "Isn't it possible, Mrs. Keene, that you stumbled and your son reached out to steady you?" I lifted my chin. "No. The camera in my hallway shows what happened. His hands were on me. Mine were on the rail. He shoved. He fell." The judge asked to see the footage. Officer Grant had already submitted it. The room fell silent as the screen flickered to life. There it was, the truth in pixels. His shove, my stumble, the grip, his fall. When it ended, the air felt heavier, like the room itself had taken a breath. Adam shifted, color rising to his face. Lena touched his arm, whispering, but he pulled away. The judge's voice cut the silence. "This court finds sufficient evidence of elder abuse and grants a protective order, effective immediately for 12 months. Mr. Keene, you are prohibited from contacting or approaching your mother in any way. Any violation will result in arrest." The gavel struck. Final. I didn't smile. Relief is quieter than joy. It was in my bones, not my face. Outside, the wind caught my scarf and whipped it across my cheek. Lena hurried after me. "Martha, please, think of Ivy. She needs her father. You've humiliated him." I stopped, turned slowly, and looked her in the eye. He humiliated himself. I only told the truth. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in years, Lena had no ready words. She turned back toward Adam, who stood by the courthouse steps, glaring at me with a mixture of anger and disbelief, as if I had broken some rule of nature by refusing to bend. I walked on without looking back. At home, I hung my coat neatly and sat at the kitchen table. The protective order papers lay in front of me, the judge's signature stark and final. I traced the ink with my finger, a line drawn not on wood this time, but on law. I brewed tea, poured it into my best porcelain cup, the one James bought me on our trip to Boston. For years I'd saved it for company. Today I drank from it alone, and it tasted like triumph. That evening, Ivy called. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Grandma, Dad says you lied, but I saw the video. He looked different. Not like him. I don't know how to think about it." "You don't have to choose sides, darling," I told her. "You only have to see what's real, and to know that none of this was your fault." She cried then, just a little, the sound of a child who still wanted to believe her father was a hero. I let her cry, murmuring the way I used to when she was small. After we hung up, I went to the stairs. The new light glowed steady overhead, the polished rail smooth under my palm. Once, it had saved me from falling. Now, it had carried me through a courtroom. I pressed my hand against it firmly. 1 year, I whispered. A year of quiet. And for the first time in decades, I believed quiet might actually be mine. It was a gray afternoon when it happened. I'd gone to the pharmacy for my blood pressure pills, a simple errand I'd done for years. The automatic doors sighed open, and as I stepped into the bright aisles, I felt it before I saw him, the weight of someone's stare. Adam stood near the checkout, his arm still in a sling, his face set hard. He looked thinner, more worn, but his eyes burned the same way they always had when he wanted something from me. "Mama," he said, voice low, urgent. "We need to talk." The protective order echoed in my head. No contact, no approach, no exceptions. I kept my hands steady on the handle of my shopping basket. "You shouldn't be here, Adam." He took a step closer, ignoring the cashier's curious glance. "You don't understand. They'll take the house. Ivy's future will be ruined. Just listen to me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911 with deliberate calm. "Emergency services, what is your location?" the dispatcher asked. "The pharmacy on Main," I said, still watching Adam. "I'm under a protective order." "My son is here, trying to make contact." Adam's face shifted, first to disbelief, then to fury. "You'd do this to me, your own son." I didn't flinch. "You did this to yourself." He tried again, his voice climbing, but the sirens came faster than his words. 2 officers entered, one of them Officer Grant. His presence was like a wall between us. "Mr. Keene," Grant said firmly, "you're in violation of a court order. Step back." Adams sputtered, tried to explain, but the cuffs clicked around his wrists before his excuses found air. The sound was final, sharp, undeniable. As they led him out, he turned once more to me, eyes wide, not with anger this time, but with something closer to fear. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I only shook my head. "No, Adam. I regret all the years I didn't say no. The pharmacy clerk rang up my prescription in silence, sliding the paper bag across the counter as though it were more than medicine. When I left, the air outside felt cleaner, thinner, as if some heavy fog had finally lifted. Later that evening, a prosecutor called. "Mrs. Keene, given the violation, we're preparing a plea arrangement. Anger management program, continued no contact, restitution for any of your expenses. Would you be willing to support this?" "Yes," I said, "as long as safety comes first." When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, the rail of the stairs in my line of sight. Once I would have been shaking. Now I was steady. Calm didn't mean weak. It meant grounded, rooted, like the wood of that rail beneath my palm. I made tea and sat with the cup warming my hands. The house was silent, but not empty. It was full of something new, the absence of fear. That night I dreamed again. Not of falling this time, not of standing, but of walking forward, step by step, the rail beside me, not holding me up, just walking with me. The day after Adam's arrest, I went back to the bank. Selena Ortiz greeted me with the same calm efficiency as before, but this time she offered me tea in a paper cup before we even began. Perhaps she could see the strain in my shoulders, or perhaps she simply knew this was no ordinary transaction. "We've finished transferring your accounts into the trust, Mrs. Keene," she said, sliding a neat folder across her desk. "From now on, all your major assets are protected. No one, not your son, not creditors, can touch them." I ran my hand lightly over the folder. For years I had signed papers that tied me tighter to Adam's needs. Now, one by one, I was cutting those ropes. Selena continued. "We've also closed the joint credit lines and removed all authorized users. The only cards active now are in your name alone." "Good," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'd like one more account, a small one. Separate, for things I want, not things I'm told I need." Her smile warmed. "Of course. We'll call it your Joy Fund, if you'd like." The name caught me off guard. Joy? When was the last time I had thought of money in that way? I nodded slowly. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." By noon, the paperwork was signed, the cards ordered, the balances secure. As I left the bank, I felt lighter, as though I'd set down a heavy sack I hadn't realized I was carrying. At home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, each page a shield. I brewed tea, sipped slowly, and let the silence hold me. The phone buzzed with new messages, not from Adam, he had no right now, but from Lena. Her words were sharp, frantic. "You've destroyed us. You don't know what you're doing. We'll lose everything because of you." I didn't reply. I'd spent decades patching their holes with my own fabric. Now those holes were theirs to mend or to widen. Later, I sat with my notebook again. On one page, I listed all the payments I'd ever made for Adam and Lena. Mortgages, tuition, repairs that never came. The list stretched on and on, a river of ink that had nearly drowned me. On the opposite page, I wrote 3 words: no more debts. That evening, I allowed myself something small from the Joy Fund. A bakery box from downtown, lemon tarts, James's favorite. I ate one by the kitchen window, the tartness sharp and sweet on my tongue. For the first time in years, I was not eating because someone else demanded it, but because I chose it. Before bed, I stood again at the stairs. The rail gleamed in the soft light, steady as ever. I ran my palm along it, not in desperation this time, but in quiet gratitude. It had saved me from falling, yes, But it had also given me something more enduring, a boundary. Boundaries are not walls. They are lines drawn with love, for oneself. And at 77, I was finally learning to draw them. Ivy showed up on a Sunday afternoon, the air outside still heavy with the smell of rain. She wasn't supposed to come. Lena had surely forbidden it. But there she was on my porch, hair damp, cheeks pink, clutching a canvas tote bag like it was a shield. "Grandma," she said breathlessly, "I needed to see you." I let her in, locking the door gently behind us. She looked older than 19 in that moment, older than she should have been, her eyes shadowed by worry. We sat at the kitchen table, the one that had held so many papers and so many secrets. I poured tea for both of us, though she barely touched hers. "Dad says you're destroying the family," she blurted. "He says you're turning everyone against him." I studied her face, my granddaughter's face, so much like her father's, but softer, kinder. "Do you believe him?" Her eyes filled. "I don't know. I love him, but I know you. You wouldn't lie. And then there's the video. He doesn't know I saw it, but I did. It's him. It's real. And I don't know what to do with that." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "You don't have to carry it. That's his burden, not yours." She shook her head fiercely. "But I can't pretend nothing happened. It changes everything." For a long time we sat in silence, the ticking clock filling the space between us. Finally, I spoke. "When I was your age, I thought love meant covering for people, making excuses, bending so they wouldn't break. It took me 77 years to learn that love without truth isn't love at all. It's fear." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them with the back of her hand, embarrassed. "Grandma, if I stand by you, it feels like betraying him." "You don't have to stand by me," I said gently. "Just stand by the truth, and stand by yourself." She looked down at the tote bag and pulled out a worn notebook. "I've been saving some of my allowance. Not much, but I wanted to give it to you, in case you need help now that—" She trailed off. My throat tightened. I pushed the notebook back toward her. "No, darling, you keep it. I don't need your money. What I need is for you to keep your kindness intact. Don't let anyone take that from you, not even family." She sniffed, nodded, and managed a small smile. "You sound stronger than I've ever heard you." I smiled back, though my heart ached. "That's because I finally stopped whispering and started speaking out loud." We ate lemon tarts from the Joy Fund account. She laughed at the name when I told her, and for a moment it felt almost normal, just a grandmother and granddaughter sharing sweets. Before she left, Ivy hugged me so tightly I had to catch my breath. "I don't know what's going to happen," she whispered. "Neither do I admitted. "But I know this. You'll always have a place here, no matter what happens with your parents. This house will never close its doors to you." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "That means everything." When the door closed behind her, I leaned against it for a long time, listening to the quiet. She was young, pulled between loyalties she hadn't chosen, but she still came. That was enough. That night, I stood at the stairs again. The rail shone under the soft light Clarence had installed. I rested my hand on it, steady, sure. Once it had saved me from falling. Now it was teaching me something even harder. How to stand tall in front of those you love, even when they turn away. I whispered into the silence. The truth is enough. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The weeks after the hearing stretched into a rhythm I had almost forgotten, my own rhythm. I woke when I pleased, not when the phone rang with another demand. I ate what I wanted, not what someone else insisted was convenient. The house, once a cage of obligations, became quiet again, like a shell I could finally hear myself inside. Mornings began with tea and the newspaper. I'd circle articles that interested me, then clip them and paste them into a notebook. A silly habit, maybe, but it gave me purpose. On Wednesdays, I went to the library for the community knitting circle. I hadn't touched needles in years, but the women welcomed me like I'd never left. We talked about yarn, not money, about stitches, not signatures. No one asked me for anything except another row. I started walking again, too. Slowly, at first, just to the corner and back. My joints protested, but the air tasted clean, unfiltered by panic. Sometimes I stopped by the bakery and bought a single roll, still warm, and ate it on a bench by the park. For once, every bite was mine. There were visits, of course. Mrs. Chen came by with soup, as she always did. Lorene from church dropped off magazines and gossip, laughing in her loud, generous way. Even the handyman Clarence stopped in once just to check the rail and the new light. "Solid as stone," he said, giving it a friendly pat. I smiled, because I knew he meant me as well. The phone still buzzed sometimes, messages from Lena, some angry, some pitiful, all unanswered. I let them sit, unopened. A part of me wondered if silence was cruel. But then I remembered the years of silence I had endured, birthdays forgotten, anniversaries ignored, grief shouldered alone. Silence, I realized, can also be a boundary. One afternoon, I pulled out an old box of recipes, yellowed index cards in my handwriting, some smudged with flour or butter. James used to tease me that my pies could mend anything. I hadn't baked in years, but my hands remembered. I made an apple pie, the house filling with cinnamon and sugar, the kind of smell that draws memories out of walls. I sat at the table with a slice, steam curling up, and thought, this is what it means to live without begging for crumbs of kindness. To sit in your own kitchen, eating your own pie, and feel full. Still, the ache was there. Not physical, though my bones had their complaints, but deeper. The ache of knowing Adam was out there, angry, telling himself I'd betrayed him. The ache of knowing love could turn into pressure into violence. It would never sit easily. But perhaps it didn't need to. Perhaps it only needed to be accepted, like a scar you stop hiding. One evening, Ivy called again. She told me about her classes, about a boy she liked but wasn't sure about. She asked if I thought it was foolish to study art history when her parents wanted her in business. I laughed softly. Foolishness is living someone else's life. Study what makes you hungry to wake up in the morning. That hunger will carry you farther than money. Her silence on the line was thoughtful, heavy. Then she said, I wish Dad could hear you the way I do. Maybe one day, I answered, but until then, you listen for yourself. That night, I sat by the stairs again. The rail gleamed under its steady light. Once it had saved me from falling. Then it had helped me through the law. Now it simply stood with me, a silent witness to my quiet days. I pressed my palm against it and whispered, I was never just someone's cushion. I am still Martha. The words settled in the house like another piece of furniture, something that belonged. And in the hush that followed, I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to fill the silence. The silence itself was enough. The courthouse again. Different day, different hearing. This time, it wasn't just about keeping Adam away. It was about what came next. The prosecutor explained the plea arrangement: restitution for my out-of-pocket costs, mandatory anger management classes, a full year of no contact with automatic extension if he slipped again. The word slipped made me shiver. I thought of the stairs, the fall, the rail under my palm. But this was a different kind of slip, one I no longer had to cushion. I sat straight, hands folded in my lap, while Adam's lawyer read his statement: regret, confusion, promises to do better. Lena sat beside him, face pinched, lips pressed so tight they nearly vanished. She didn't speak once. When the judge asked if I wanted to address the court, I stood. My legs trembled, but my voice did not. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for safety, for the right to live in my own home without fear, and to use my own name without someone else's hand on it. The judge nodded. And do you accept the agreement, Mrs. Keene? I do, on one condition: that the boundary remains clear. No exceptions. Her gavel struck once, the sound sharp as a crack in ice. So ordered. I walked out without looking at Adam. I didn't need to. The law had spoken louder than any argument we could have had. Outside, the sky was pale blue, stretched thin like porcelain. I breathed it in, the air of something finished. Not everything was over, not the ache, not the memories. But this chapter was closed. Lena brushed past me on the steps, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. You've ruined him, Martha. He'll never forgive you. I turned to her, calm as stone. Forgiveness isn't mine to beg for any more. She faltered, perhaps expecting anger, then hurried after Adam, her heels clattering against the pavement. For the first time, I didn't feel small watching them leave. I felt level, steady. That evening, I went home and brewed tea in the porcelain cup James bought me long ago. I carried it to the stairs, sat on the second step, and looked at the rail. Its surface gleamed under Clarence's new light, strong and sure. I reached out, let my fingers trace the wood. This rail had been my anchor, my witness, my boundary. And now it was my reminder. Dignity is not something given. It is something claimed. I finished my tea in silence, set the cup aside, and whispered to the house. It's done. The walls held the words, steady and true. The house was quiet when I woke that morning, not the anxious silence of years past, when I strained to hear the phone ring or the car in the driveway, but a calm quiet, like a pond at dawn. I shuffled into the kitchen, boiled water, and brewed tea in the porcelain cup James had given me on a trip long ago. Steam rose in thin curls, and I thought, this, right here, is peace. I carried the cup to the stairs. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, catching the polished rail Clarence had secured. It gleamed golden, warm against my hand. I lingered there a while, palm pressed to wood, remembering the night it had saved me. Without it, I would have gone down those stairs, my story ending on cold steps instead of carrying me here. That rail was more than wooden screws now. It was a line, a promise, a symbol of the boundary I had finally claimed. Mrs. Chen came by around noon with fresh dumplings, fussing over me the way she always did. I laughed, thanked her, and sent her home with half the batch of lemon tarts I'd baked the day before. Later, Lorene stopped in, her voice booming as she recounted gossip from church. "You're a new woman, Martha," she declared, squeezing my hand. And for once, I didn't brush it off. Ivy arrived in the evening. She came alone, shoulders squared, eyes thoughtful. We ate soup together at the table, and she told me about her classes, about the boy she liked, about her dreams of traveling to Florence to see paintings she'd only studied in books. She hesitated when she spoke of her parents, voice softening. "Dad still won't say your name without anger," she admitted. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's his battle, not yours." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. "I'm glad you're still you, Grandma. Stronger, maybe, but still you." After she left, I tidied the kitchen, humming softly. It had been years since I'd hummed to myself without realizing it. That night, I sat once more at the stairs. The rail glowed in the lamplight, smooth and steady. I laid my hand on it and thought of all the stages it had carried me through: fear, survival, truth, law, peace. Each time it had been there, a silent partner. I spoke aloud, not to anyone, but to the house, to myself, to the years behind me. I am still Martha, not just a mother, not just someone's cushion, not someone to be handled or hushed. I am mine. The words did not echo. They simply settled into the air, into the wood of the rail, into the walls that had witnessed so much. I went to bed early, pulling the quilt up around my shoulders. For the first time in decades, my last thought before sleep was not worry, not dread, not wondering what would be asked of me tomorrow. It was simple. Tomorrow, I will bake. Tomorrow, I will walk to the park. Tomorrow, I will live. And that was enough. So if you're reading this, if you're a woman who is bent until her back aches, who is given until her hands are empty, hear me now. You are allowed to draw the line. You are allowed to hold the rail. You are allowed to say no. This world will not hand you dignity. You have to claim it. Quietly, firmly, step by step. And when you're ready, share your own story. Someone out there needs to hear it.